Okay.
So everyone who's paying any attention at all knows that more people are coming across the U.S. border from foreign countries illegally than any time in American history, and that the American population is changing faster than any time in the last 250 years. And
Yeah, you're right. That's true.
that's not just true for the border states, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Texas. It's true for at least 48 of the 50 states, the contiguous states. I mean, small towns in Wisconsin and Iowa look completely different from what they looked like 2 years ago.
That's crazy.
So this is changing the country in a way that can't be undone. There's no bigger thing that's ever happened in American history than what's happening right now. And the question is, how is it happening? Why is it happening? And who's allowing it to happen?
I don't know.
And to answer those questions to some extent, we had a pretty remarkable conversation about a month and a half ago with Brett Weinstein, who's, of course, a scientist and an academic, now hosts a fairly famous podcast called Dark Horse with his wife.
Okay.
And he went to the Darien Gap, which is literally the gap in the Pan American Highway from South America to the United States in Panama. It's one of the roughest places in the world, famously.
Really?
And he went there with a man called Michael Yon, who is probably the most experienced war correspondent in the United States. Here's what he said about Michael Yon.
Well, I wound up there because Michael Yon had been sending me materials, thinking that I would be interested in what was taking place in Panama. And of course, I was utterly fascinated by what I was seeing.
Are you serious?
Now, some of your viewers may not know Michael. Michael is a former Green Beret who has refashioned himself. Well, the last time I was on your program, I talked about Goliath.
That's right.
Yes.
And if there's a Goliath, there's a David, and I would argue that Michael Yon is like David's eyes. He's been traversing the world trying to understand a story that as yet has no name.
Seriously.
And that story is partially in the Darien of Panama, and it's all sorts of other places, including in various UN installations. There's some story that is difficult to piece together, and he's been physically traveling to all of its various epicenters and showing people.
Wow.
So a year ago, it would have been pretty hard to find an English speaker who had been to the Darien Gap. Again, it's famous, this region is famous for being the most lawless and dangerous place on planet Earth.
What? Are you serious?
Michael Yon has now spent about 6 months in the Darien Gap shooting film, interviewing people. We're going to show you a lot of what he's found during the course of the interview you're about to see.
Okay.
But one piece of tape that caught our eye, kind of remarkable, a town of about 300 indigenous people, only about a dozen working toilets, deep in the jungle, completely overrun by thousands of migrants from all over the world, including Africa and Asia.
Boy.
Watch.
Voilà.
That was really shocking and sad.
All moving to your country. Now, it's happening. That's the end of the United States, the country that you grew up in. Irreparable. Forever.
That's really sad.
People in Washington, the people who control the Congress and the White House, seem to be in favor of this. And now they're just kind of saying it out loud. Chuck Schumer, probably the darkest member of the United States Congress, of course, the head Democrat in the Senate.
Uh-huh.
He's telling us that we can't deal with any of that because Ukraine's border is too important. It's Ukraine. It's only about Ukraine. Here's Chuck Schumer.
And here we go.
Let me make it clear. We made the overwhelming sentiment in that meeting is we got to do Ukraine now. And there are other issues, including border, which we should address, but not now.
Is he all right upstairs?
Right. So if you want to know what evil looks like in 2024, you just saw it. It's Chuck Schumer. Okay, the embodiment of it right now.
Yup!
But we did want to see more tape and hear more firsthand account from what it looks like at the other side, the Darien Gap, the beginning of the journey to our country, where this invasion is beginning.
You're goddamn right.
And so we are grateful now to speak to Michael Yon, who spent more time there than maybe any American. Michael Yon, thanks so much for joining us. So could you just start with the overview? What role, and maybe I've misstated it, but what role does the Darien Gap play in the invasion underway of the United States?
Hey, y'all, come look at this.
Oh, it's absolutely vital, Tucker. As soon as Biden was installed, I was actually in D.C. for the quote unquote, whatever it was where they installed him. And then I flew straight within about 24 hours to El Paso because I thought that the aliens would start flooding across the border, and they did.
Hey!
And so from there, I flew down to Colombia, to the other side of the Darien Gap, because I thought that the Darien Gap would end up being a major pathway to the United States.
Oh, you're probably right, as usual.
And so went into the Darien Gap on the Colombian side, just not very far, just about an hour inside. It's very dangerous over there.
What?
And I was there with Masako Ganaha, the famous Japanese journalist, and Chuck Holton, a war correspondent friend who just got strafed yesterday in Burma. But so we were out there in the Darien Gap on the Colombia side. We then flew over to Panama and went down into the Darien Gap on the Panama side.
Okay.
And so I recognized this would likely be the major invasion route of the United States. And so I just started spending a great deal of time down there. I got to know many of the Imbara Indians and Kuna Indians and others down in the jungle. And I started mapping out the pathways that they're coming in, getting to know members of the government and that sort of thing.
Dude!
Now, keep in mind, a lot of people have no idea who I am, but I've spent most of my life downrange out overseas. I am an American, born and raised, was in the U.S. Army, that sort of thing.
Oh, dude, that's crazy.
And but most of my life has been downrange. For I would say 2/3 of my life has been in Middle East, Asia, deep. And I spent a year in and around China. I've written 3 books on Chinese information war that are only in Japanese, actually.
Really?
Because I've been working to wake up Japan for years. So in other words, I'm not coming into this flat-footed. I'm not coming into this as somebody who looks at a map and thinks, hey, this might be the route. I'm looking at this as someone who has traveled in about 100 countries or lived in so many countries.
Yeah, damn right!